Absolutely.
Poor Gloria. She deserved better.
Absolutely, that was my low light. Jean, stop saying hooker. Unless you're playing rugby, in which case you can say hooker. That's a position in rugby.
It's also a last name, I found out, because a missionary had it. It's really funny.
And my highlight is Jared's acting in the last couple scenes he was in with Father Gregory and the last motel scene. I was very deeply touched by Sam's desperation to be saved in this episode. I think that Jared did a wonderful job. Like, when Father Gregory appeared, you can see it in Sam's face, like, just a sense of, like, disappointment and dread and hopelessness that comes over him. And into the next scene, I think he did a great job, and I feel like sometimes we don't compliment Jared's acting, even when he does deserve it, so I want to take a minute for him.
Good job, Jared.
Yeah.
You made us feel things.
Yeah. And our next segment is Call CPS, which is times when adults should be calling CPS. I don't think there are any in this episode.
I mean, there was that 13-year-old girl.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about her for a second.
Yeah.
Jennifer's parents, where are they?
I don't know.
Where are Jennifer's
I know my
parents?
parents would not be wanting me meeting random people when I was 13.
If my parents had found out I'd done anything like that, I would never have been on the internet again. That is very unsafe. Literally only a bad thing could have happened to Jennifer if her and Frank had met up. Only something bad would have come out of that scenario. That's horrible.
I was only allowed to have Facebook when I was 14, and it was because we were moving across the country. That was the only reason I could get Facebook.
I just like blocked that out immediately after we talked about it, but oh my god, yeah, absolutely.
Like, Jennifer, are you okay?
I mean, I'm okay. I have kind of like a headache right now, but...
Not you, gosh.
So.
I hope your headache gets better.
Our next segment is mental health check.
Well.
I'm not a psychologist. This segment is based purely on my own opinions, and a weekly reminder that if you're struggling with anything at all, please reach out for help. This week, it was a week for religious exploration that I feel like everyone's mental health took a toll in the process. Everybody was not feeling good at the end of this episode.
No, they were not. This is one where we didn't really have a winner.
No, absolutely not.
Like, we dealt with the threat, but what didn't really fulfill us the way it should have.
Yeah, it was a lot. It was... Sam had this, like, really, I don't know, very, like, intense confession that he, like, needs to be saved. But I don't know. I didn't even know what to say at this point in my notes, to be honest. I feel like we talked about it a lot already, like, where the boys were at. Dean also, like, had some pretty intense moments, like, when he was talking about Mary dying.
Mm-hmm.
No one was feeling good during this, I guess.
No, but they weren't feeling good for any new reasons.
Yeah. Soul transactions, there weren't really any. Sam's traumatic brain injury. I didn't know if this episode counted or not. I was really tempted to count it as like a half episode because Sam definitely was unconscious.
Do you think rapture counts as like a brain injury?
That was the thing. There was no evidence of any kind of hit to the head or brain trauma. It didn't even look like he really hit his head on the way down. So I'm gonna say he's okay this week. I'm gonna say this doesn't count.
Alright, the only pain is in the emotions.
He didn't get like punched in the face.
That helps.
So I think what I'm really looking for with this is, like, A, like, how many times Sam's, like, knocked out just, like, to not be involved in a fight. And then B, like, in season 14, Sam almost dies from, like, one hit to the head too many. And I really was like, how many times does he get hit into the head before that happens? How many is too many times?
Yeah, this would probably just count as, like, a feint. So
Yeah,
I think we're okay.
He definitely was, like, out for a bit, but yeah, I would say this is, like a feint, like, a religious ecstasy kind of moment. I'm suddenly reminded of the movie Jesus Camp, where all the kids are crying and fainting and all that.
That sounds intense.
It's a documentary about kids being released by, like, religious extremists.
Lovely.
Extremists might be too intense a word. Evangelical Christians is what I meant. They're very loud about wanting everyone to believe what they believe. Which is usually when I start to have an issue with religion in general.
Yeah.
Anyway, we only have one segment left, so I guess we should do it. And that is the line of the week. So guess might pick lines that are funny or cute or in this episode probably dramatic or emotional. And let's start with Vail.
Well, I have to pick the obvious one. Sam saying there's no such thing as unicorns. That was actually my reaction. I was like, no.
Like, what kind of dark, horrifying world is this? You don't have unicorns?
Yeah, all these bad things exist and no one invented unicorns to, like, brighten the place up? That's disappointing.
Yeah, like my favorite brand of folklore, it's just been ruined.
I love unicorns. They deserve better.
Plus, he was just so funny. I love when Sam's all sarcastic about stuff like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Meredith, how about you?
How about the SpongeBob placemat? That was funny.
SpongeBob placemat, yeah. Not Sam's use of the word ghetto, but the placemat itself.
I don't care about that. I care about the placemat.
And Jen, how about you?
Yes, dude, I'm not enabling your sick habit. You're like one of those lab rats that pushes the pleasure button instead of the food button until it dies.
That's such a university-educated joke. Like, that's amazing.
I know, the fact that the dean's only response is, hey, I eat. Like,
yeah.
Oh my fucking god.
That is such a, like,
Great line.
I went to Stanford on a full ride kind of joke. My line of the week is not a joke, and once again, I regret not going first. But it's just Sam saying, I do pray every day. I have for a long time. I think it's really well established on this podcast and in this episode that I'm an atheist, and I have no real opinion on God. But I do care a lot about what people do in the name of religion, be it benign worship or charity or violence, whatever angle your religious worship is taking. But I think there's something I personally really respect about like a quiet everyday faith and religion that Sam seems to have, that we kind of talked about, where, you know, it's not like something that other people observe, but just people who find comfort in religion without advertising their religious views. And I don't know, I just really thought that that made sense for Sam's character.
Yeah, well, he's constantly on the road, so being part of a religious community
isn't really for him.
Well, I think he'd be able to do it if he really wanted to, but it wouldn't be the same community every time.
Yeah, like I think if you're in a religion that has like well-established churches, like most of the Christian denominations or Judaism or Islam, like, you know, there's churches in every town that you can go to, and like it won't be the same church every time, but like you can go to a church and you're gonna get the same kind of group of people everywhere.
Yeah.
People with common beliefs.
Yeah, that's probably
You
why
know, common
it speaks even
beliefs,
more
yeah.
to his character, because, like, you know, it might have been a stabilizing factor in his early childhood and stuff,
That
but the
too.
fact that he's not outspoken about it kind of shows that it's very humble and it's very true, and he's not projecting it onto anyone else or using it as an excuse.
And we know John, like, he didn't necessarily push them to be religious or not religious, but he did take them. They, like, went to confession once or twice when they were kids. Like, they definitely engaged in some, like, Christian, like, church
And we know
schooling.
that John took them to Pastor Jim's a
Yeah,
few
they, like,
times,
grew
and
up
he
with
was
Pastor
a
Jim a
priest.
lot.
Yeah.
That too.
I've said this, like, maybe not on this podcast, but a lot of the time in real life. But anyway, I think one of the really interesting things about, like, Abrahamic religions is that they rely more on internal conversion than they do on external actions.
Yeah.
Like, you really have to, like, in order to be a member or just actually be religious, it's not really about, like, the rituals you do or how often you go to church. It's about what you feel and believe. Like, you have to take care of that first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's actually something that made it stand out in the ancient world, because most pagan religions at the time were really about ritual. They were about pleasing the gods and doing what they wanted in order to have, like, kind of an alliance with them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, my religious studies brain is long dormant, but I did take a couple of religious studies classes when I was in like early university, so like 4 years ago now, and like yeah, exactly that.
No.
Can I mention the music?
Yeah, talk about the music. I don't feel like I talked about it at all, so that's out of character for me.
Yeah, I just love the music because, especially episodes like this, for some reason it just had like a really cool theme it probably played at least 4 or 5 times, if not a couple times more than that. And it was really powerful towards the end. Like, I had to pause it during the Father Reynolds scene, and all of a sudden my brain just like shut down from the sadness. And it's like, damn, like it really helped. And it was really beautiful this time. There's also another theme, timestamp like 27 minutes in when they're figuring stuff out. I feel like it's the figure out theme that they've played in like 1 or 2 other episodes because it sounds familiar. So yeah, I think once in a while, not as often as I'd like, but once in a while the composers are pretty good. So
I usually don't notice a lot of unless it's a like Dean's theme, I don't notice a lot of the ones that are just like little like riffs and themes and stuff like that. I don't notice them a lot unless it's like an actual song, in which case I am immediately taking notes. So I'm glad that you had that to talk about. And I kind of didn't go into too deep on the knocking on heaven's door because I'd rather go into it on the second occurrence.
Oh, I was gonna say one thing I do think is is interesting is Sam, like we were just talking about Sam not really having a community, so for him, this religious experience is more on like a one-on-one level.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I feel like we had briefly touched on, some guests here, or people in the podcast either being atheists or not having a strong religious opinion, and then others of us are like actively religious, and participate in religious practices. And I know I'm one of those people, and we were kind of talking, and it's like a Christian denomination, but we were talking more about like the community aspect and how for some attendees, they don't, they'll publicly say that they might not fully know exactly what's going on in terms of their own faith, their own beliefs, but they still will attend like our services because they really have come to enjoy the community. And I know we also talked about Sam himself kind of having this chosen one complex. I mean, that does make sense. We find out later on it definitely pans out that he's right
he
for
might
believing
super
that.
honestly.
Right? But I do think it's a little interesting that he uses religion as this thing that, it's important to him, but it also feeds into that chosen one complex, this need to be redeemed. Whereas if, obviously if they had a much easier life and he was maybe religious, but maybe just hanging out in the same parish the entire time, like would he still be looking at organized religion as a way to redeem himself, or would he just be looking at it as maybe a source of community and not necessarily delving into that angle? So that was something that I kind of thought of.
My brain is doing things right now.
That's a really interesting question. I've seen so many other people like that at my church too. Yeah, actually, even like back in like really early Christianity, the community was really important to getting members because so many people were just drawn to that idea of having this community as support. So it'd be interesting if Sam had that same thing. Like he would be one member of a group that were like him instead of being the only religious person that he really knows.
Yeah, or that he's like in regular contact with.
Yeah. It would just be him because he's always with Dean.
Yeah, I mean, and I think another thing too is we were also talking about as religious, if you're religious and you're watching Supernatural, which has all these religious themes, like how does that feed into your own faith? And I kind of ignore it, but whenever I see Sam express his own faith in the show, it's always a type of faith I personally can never really relate to. It's like something I practice and, I participate in, but I've never looked at myself as like needing to apologize for things or needing to be redeemed from things. Like I'm a queer person, but our church has always been inclusive and queer friendly, so that was another thing. Like I never had any doubts in my mind that if I were to like come out to the people that I knew at church, like I would be accepted, which I think is really great. But there's just like, that's like one microcosm of it. So whenever I see these episodes that get into Sam's faith or like the faith in Supernatural, it's always like a type of faith that I don't necessarily see in my own life, which I just also think is like neat.
I have a couple things. Now,
okay.
My brain's been turned on.
KJ's brain is fired up.
It is fired
finally.
up. Now that we're almost done. So I think something that Sam expressed in that scene with Dean at the end of the episode where he's like, I just needed it to be real because I needed to be saved. Dean's like, well, like, I'm gonna save you. And Sam expresses like he just needed there to be someone else. Like he is looking for that community, and it is in a bit of a chosen one complexy kind of way. But like having someone else that he's accountable to besides Dean, like, is part of it. And like having someone who will catch him if he falls. And John has deprived them both of any community, both like any sort of religious community or school or any stability in life, but also like even other hunters. So like they are lacking that sense of community in any aspect of their lives, like religious or otherwise.
Well, also they're lacking any way to really seek it.
Yeah, like their lifestyle is very nomadic and isolated.
Yeah, and they're not really trying to find like other friends.
They just kind of get adopted by random people like Bobby and Ellen.
Yeah, and that's not really something that they pursue. So Sam is looking towards God for that community because I guess he just doesn't really see very many other options for him.
Something else I also think is worth pointing out is that almost nobody in the writer's room, especially in the early seasons, was Christian. Like I want to say like 4 out of 5 were Jewish. Eric Kripke's Jewish. I'm pretty sure Sarah Gamble's also Jewish, but I'm not 100% sure. I could be wrong about that. But Eric Kripke's definitely Jewish. And there are quite a lot of, there's at least a few supernatural podcasts that are like supernatural podcasts that go through and like look at the like Jewish influence on supernatural.
And that's really interesting because like the show really focuses on the Old Testament.
Yeah, and like it does, and like it's just interesting.
Yeah, and that's another thing is that I think for a lot of like Jews and Christians, one of the themes would be that you can be forgiven by God, but I'm outwardly not a John lover in the slightest. I think that like with their dad,